And so we come to the closing plenary of the 115th annual meeting of the Society. Before we begin, I'd like to remind you that we have a special toast for which we hope you'll join us at the conclusion of this session. First, let me thank our sponsors, the Yasser Institute for International and European Law, the Embassy of the Netherlands in the United States, and the Municipality of The Hague for sponsoring and working with us to organize this session. This decade-long partnership has enriched our discussions by bringing prominent figures from The Hague and around the world to the annual meeting. On behalf of the Society, I want to thank Dr. Ernst Hirschbauen, President of the Yasser Institute, and Professor Jan Nyman, its Academic Director, who's the convener of this year's program and from whom you'll hear in a moment. But first, I'm very honored to introduce the Honorable Jan van Zanten, the Mayor of the Municipality of The Hague, to welcome you to this session.
Dear all, it gives me great pleasure to say a few words to you today. Today, at the final session of the annual meeting of the American Society of International Law. And I wish I could be there with you in person. The Hague feels closely connected with Ismael, not the least because we share the same goal: promoting peaceful international relations through the use of multilateral international agreements and institutions. In 1910, the renowned legal scholar Tobias Asser became an honorary member of your organization. Nobel Prize winner Tobias Asser witnessed the birth of The Hague as the international city of peace and justice. It was a time which saw many rapid technological advances that changed the world completely. And that era too, jurists tried to find answers to the legal and ethical questions brought by the new technologies. A well-known example being the ban on the use of chemical weapons that was formulated during the first peace conference here in The Hague. Now, it is a digital revolution which has raised numerous new dilemmas, bringing with it many legal and ethical obstacles to be overcome, of course. And as a place where these things are considered, The Hague is once again playing an important role. The famous Asser Institute conducts intensive research on the ethical, legal and technical aspects of artificial intelligence. In particular, where AI is used for military purposes. The results of that research will be vital for drawing up rules on the use of this new technology. The Hague is pleased to be able to provide a platform for all of this. First and foremost, because of the vast knowledge and expertise available in our city. And I'm referring not just to The Hague itself, but also the universities we have just around the corner in Leiden and Delft. Institutions of international fame with whom we also work closely together. On top of which, The Hague is recognized as the place where trust can be built. Trust between nations, businesses and other players on the world stage. Ismael, and in particular the Asser Institute, are vital partners for The Hague. And I therefore sincerely hope that we will soon be able to meet in person, either in Washington or here in The Hague. Remember that you will always be welcome here. For now, I would like to wish you a constructive and fruitful meeting. Thank you. Au revoir et peut-être à bientôt.
Thank you, Mayor van Zanten. It is now my pleasure to invite our convener, Dr. Nyman, to introduce the panel.
Thank you, Catherine, for your kind words. And thank you also to Mark and Wes for the wonderful collaboration with the American Society. So ladies and gentlemen, fellow members of the American Society, it's my great pleasure to welcome you to this 2021 closing plenary. Again, a warm welcome also on behalf of the city of The Hague, to which we just listened to our mayor, who kindly supports this plenary. Now, the overall theme of our annual meeting is Reconceiving International Law, Creativity in Times of Crisis. And while thinking about the topic for this roundtable, the governance of artificial intelligence came to mind instantly. If there is one topic on which we need all the intellectual power, creativity, and legal imagination in the world, it is this one. And this holds in particular for a phenomenon such as autonomous weapons. Here, the need for legal creativity is urgent. Thus, I'm delighted to meet today on reconceptualizing international law's role in governance of AI. Through the case study of autonomous weapons, this roundtable examines how AI challenges existing concepts and doctrinal categories of international law, and how a reconceived international law could in turn contribute to the governance of AI. As you know, the Asser Institute is a research institute for international and European law. Our name giver, Tobias Asser, we just saw him in the video, was indeed one of those international lawyers who contributed to the development of the international legal order at a time in which industrialization and new weaponry created an urgent need to develop international humanitarian law and to promote arms control through law. Today at the Asser Institute, one of our research projects is Dilemma. This project explores interdisciplinary perspectives on military applications of AI, with a focus on legal, ethical, and technical approaches to safeguarding human agency over military artificial intelligence. My colleague, Dr. Sajjad Ali, is a philosopher of science and technology, and he works on this project. So I'm delighted Sajjad will moderate this session and introduce our highly esteemed speakers. So I wish you a very good finale of our annual meeting, and over to you, Sajjad. Thank you.
Thank you, Jana, and greetings to all our distinguished panelists and viewers. For a long time, the relationship between our artifactual systems and our moral and legal norms could be described as a relationship between means and ends. Artifactual systems belong to the realm of means, and we used our norms and values as ends to regulate these systems and desirably incorporate them into our societies. Times have changed. With the advent of modern technologies, and especially artificial intelligence, we are witnessing new ways in which our means and ends interact. Not only has it become challenging to mold AI technologies into the existing normative frameworks, but also technologies are demanding us to rethink our most fundamental normative concepts. While existing international law has developed with human subject in mind, AI technologies are making distinctions between entities who do and those who do not bear rights, between agents and non-agents, or between what is human and what is not human, more and more blurry and problematic. The means have started questioning the ends, and indeed, we find ourselves in need of redefining who we are and what laws we want to have. With a focus on AI used in military systems as our case study, I am joined by 4 exemplary panelists to discuss some of the challenges that these technologies pose on international law. But let me first briefly introduce our panelists. Our first panelist, Jonathan Horowitz, is a legal advisor at the ICRC's regional delegation for the United States and Canada, with a focus on new technologies in armed conflict and urban warfare. Secondly, we have Mary Ellen O'Connell, who holds the Robert and Marion Shaw Chair in Law and is also research professor of International Dispute Resolution at Kroc Institute for International Peace Studies at the University of Notre Dame. Then we have Ambassador Marjolein van Dalen, who is a career diplomat in the Netherlands Ministry of Foreign Affairs, with a focus on non-proliferation and disarmament. And finally, we have Karen Shah as a former member of the EU's high-level expert group on AI, and is currently an interdisciplinary professor at Birmingham Law School and the School of Computer Science at the University of Birmingham. Let's start our discussions by questioning the need for AI regulation. Jonathan, in my introductory remarks, I mentioned that international law has evolved with the idea of human subject in mind. Do you think that artificial intelligence is challenging this idea? And if yes, in what ways?
Well, thank you for the question, Sajjad, and also thank you for the opportunity to join the panel. And to echo Catherine's sentiments, thank you to the municipality of The Hague, the Embassy of the Netherlands to the United States, and the Asser Institute, and of course ASIL for sponsoring and convening this event. Let me start by saying that the ICRC has a mandate to promote respect for international humanitarian law, and we also help protect and provide assistance to victims of armed conflict and other situations of violence. So we think about your question through the lens of international humanitarian law or the law of armed conflict, with an emphasis that humans taking part in armed conflict must uphold their legal obligations and their ethical responsibilities. And in situations of armed conflict, AI might be a component of cyber capabilities or disinformation operations. A commander might want to use artificial intelligence to support targeting decisions, or AI might, of course, be part of autonomous weapon systems. And so we need to assess the challenges that AI brings to all of these environments from a legal, humanitarian, and ethical perspective. And also to mention that AI can also support humanitarian action, which raise additional issues. And while international humanitarian law, of course, predates artificial intelligence, it's a body of law that did anticipate technological development. So while AI does pose challenges, which I'll mention in a moment, that are important to concepts of international humanitarian law, those challenges don't justify scrapping the entire body of law and saying it's not fit for purpose. But the ICRC's views are still developing as we learn more about current and emerging military applications of AI, including machine learning, and better understanding the actual and foreseeable consequences. But sorry, to get to your actual question, there are two notable challenges, and they have to do with the role of humans in decision-making processes on the battlefield, such as targeting decisions, and ensuring humans remain accountable for the outcomes on a battlefield. And here's why. So many militaries are regarding artificial intelligence as having the benefits of speeding up decision-making processes beyond what a human is capable of doing. With regard to autonomous weapon systems that select and engage targets without human intervention, what gets lost is this need for speed in a commander's ability. What gets lost for the need to speed is a commander's ability to know exactly where and when something is being targeted and who or what specifically is being targeted. So in other words, such autonomy produces unpredictable results, which raise questions about a commander's ability to use them in compliance with international humanitarian law. Now, add AI and the problems associated with autonomy increase because AI brings with it additional unpredictability and the inability for us to know why systems, in this case, autonomous weapon systems, produced the result it may have produced. And these two challenges I mentioned, decision-making and accountability, are of course closely linked. If we remove humans from the decision-making process, and then we'll start to think of humans as unaccountable from those decisions, which do raise serious ethical questions, such as whether algorithms should be making life or death decisions about the fate of humans. The ICRC doesn't think they should, and that's why we advocate for a human-centered approach to the development and use of artificial intelligence and autonomous weapon systems in armed conflict, so to ensure outcomes can be compliant with international law and retain human agency in life and death decisions. Let me just end on one point, which is this doesn't mean that commanders or their lawyers need to become technologists who understand the inner workings of how artificial intelligence works. But they do need to know such things as what the AI is designed to do and under what circumstances it'll become too brittle to be relied upon, especially in complex environments and outside situations in which they've become trained. Finally, many of these issues also need to be accounted for well before the technology even makes it into the commander's hands, such as through predetermined design limitations and through legal reviews of weapons, all to ensure compliance with international humanitarian law, given the design of the weapon and its intended use.
Thanks, Jonathan. A lot of these issues that you mentioned, we will come back, especially the issue of human supervision, and also whether the current laws are satisfactory enough to address the need of new technologies. But for now, I want to get your thoughts on this, Karen. What do you think about the need for new rules and regulation for AI? Because you have extensive expertise, especially in relation to AI. And so one simple question is, what can even go wrong if we don't do much?
Oh, how long is a piece of string? That's my answer to that one. So it's a very good question. And I'm often asked is, what should we do to regulate AI? And I guess there's a preliminary question of trying to first understand the capabilities of these systems. So I'd just like to step back a little bit first before addressing that question, if you don't mind, and draw attention to the current capabilities and functionalities of AI technologies. And by that, I mean machine learning applications. And I want to draw attention to 5 features that I think are especially important when we're thinking about these technologies. So firstly, these systems enable automation at scale, and we're talking global scale, and at speed. And that's why somebody can upload a video of a terrorist attack and it can go viral in minutes, and you cannot put the genie back in the bottle. So I think it's really important to be attentive to its capacity to operate at scale and at speed. Secondly, these systems are capable of automating decisions. And that means they're capable of actually triggering action in the world. Not just talking, but doing. And if you think about that happening at scale and at speed and in a manner that is remote and distanced from the human actors who decide to deploy these technologies and against whom they will act, this includes, of course, launching weapons. So these are very, very powerful capabilities. And that's only 2 features that I've addressed at the moment. At the same time, even though they're capable of operating at this global level, almost instantaneously and real time, they've also got this capacity to operate in an incredibly precise, very granular way. And that's why we get these highly personalized informational environments, because our online behavior is constantly being tracked and profiled and spewing back to us stuff that the people who want to sell us stuff think we want to buy. And that's happening all the time for everybody who is acting online. At the same time, despite all of these capabilities, they are incredibly complicated and opaque. So even if we did have access to the inside of what's going on under the hood, to the black boxes and to the data, I wouldn't be able to tell you what was going on. And I know a lot about these technologies. You would need a lot of expertise to really understand what was actually going on inside those systems to trigger all of those actions with all of those capabilities that I'm talking about. And finally, all of these technologies thrive and are powered by data. And that means that they have this voracious appetite to suck up as much data as possible. And how do they do that? Well, the simple answer to that is surveillance. Okay, so the capacity to use data infrastructures to operate a totalizing surveillance system is enormous. That's what big data wants in order to get more and more powerful and more capable in what it can actually offer. So if you take all of those features together, you can see that these technologies, which are of a general purpose nature, so I'm not just talking about weapons, I'm talking about the general capacities of these technologies, they are extraordinarily powerful in novel and unprecedented ways. And of course, if you're a lawyer, where there is power, there is scope for abuse. And that's my long answer to why we need to regulate AI, because the capacity for things to go wrong is enormous. So whether that means we need new norms, I think is potentially a more limited question than the question we need to be asking, because I think it's not just the norms that we need to think about, but also oversight and enforcement at a meaningful level that actually has traction. Because somebody can promise me that the black box does this, but how do I know? How can I trust that those claims are true? And we haven't really started to engage in what that entails for real live systems that operate in the world. And you can see that in the discussions we're having about the harms that are caused on social media. We can't put that genie back in the bottle. And we're struggling, and it will be a long path to getting that genie back into a place where we feel it's appropriately respecting of the kind of civilized norms that we would like to see in our public sphere. So if that's just a glimpse of what you can do in AI and content, imagine what you could do with AI and weapons. So I'll just leave it there, and I'll leave it to the others to take forward on that score. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. We will come back to the issue of AI used for weapon systems. But Mary Ellen, I would also like to hear your thoughts on this. Are there any fundamental concepts of international law which you think are challenged by AI? Or if you have any comments on the previous two questions, I would also like to hear your thoughts.
Thank you very much, Sajjad, and also thanks a lot. Oh, sorry, did you say Mary Ellen or
Yes,
Ellen?
I think our names sound very much alike.
Yeah,
I heard Mary Ellen, but Sajjad, who did you mean, Mary Ellen or Marilyn?
I said Mary Ellen, but we will. You're more than welcome to come to this point as well, Mary Ellen. Yeah.
Yeah. No, I'll wait for Mary Ellen.
Okay. I'll be brief so we can all jump in on this, because I think it is the table setting question. We all want to discuss it. I'm glad I have followed Karen, because she has mentioned the need for new norms. Jonathan spoke to the fact that we have some very powerful norms already in international humanitarian law, and believes that these can be examined and applied to this new technology. Karen raises a perhaps competing point that, in fact, we need new norms. And I'm going to agree with Karen, with all due respect for Jonathan and my great respect for international humanitarian law, for this reason. I have been following the development of AI weapons after 20 years of following the development of unmanned systems. And I believe we need right now a radical shift in how we're thinking about weapons and their deployment, because of all the reasons Karen just mentioned: the unintended consequences, the lack of knowability, predictability of how these weapons are going to react in the real world. So my radical suggestion for how we go forward in this new age of robotic weapons, of fully autonomous weapons, is to collapse and to finally do away with the distinction between war and peace. We have built up a vast distinction with detailed rules governing the battlefield. But what we've seen in terms of those rules and the privileges that they grant to war-fighting countries has been taken by the developers of this new technology, first unmanned, and now we can predict what's going to happen with AI weapons. And they want to expand what is considered the legal battlefield. So we're seeing drones being used far from anything we could define as armed conflict hostilities, because of the ease of use, because they don't cause any risk for the operator, because they can get to difficult terrain. So instead of saying, but is that terrain a battlefield where this kind of weaponry, intentional heavy munition weaponry, can be used, we redefine the battlefield. And we have redefined who is a combatant, a lawful target. It used to be somebody who is actually directly participating in hostilities, a member of an armed forces in an armed conflict. And now it's somebody we call a militant increasingly. Well, militant, as Jonathan will tell us, is not a legal term of art. But we want to kill these people because we have the technology, because they pose some kind of threat. When we continue in this vein with expanding the battlefield, the notion of where we can use this new high lethality weaponry, we will quickly see that the whole world is what George Bush said it would be after 9/11, a global war. Better to move back and follow another development in international law. So this is one, expanding the battlefield so that we can use this weaponry. The other way to go is following the new pressures for expanding the scope of international human rights law, and find that human rights law is what should first and foremost be regulating AI weapon development. And I would say, let's go back and do a better job of restraining unmanned systems as well. If we move to a world in which there is human rights as the predominant, we don't have to worry so much about the battlefield. We will always look at and consider that necessity and the immediate need to save a life, the governing principle protecting the human right to life in peacetime, will be whatever we are lawfully programming into the algorithms. That will be a far better way to go forward than trying to keep this technology within IHL rules and the privilege to kill intentionally.
Thanks, Mary-Ellen. Jonathan, you might be wanting to clarify ICRC's position a little bit further here.
I do. Thank you, and thank you for that, Mary-Ellen. So I was in my previous response. I was getting through the challenges of human decision making and accountability. But to be certain, since 2015, the ICRC has been calling for internationally agreed limits on autonomous weapons, whether those are new rules, policy standards, or best practices. And we have a list that I think we'll have time to get through. I would hope we could, but I just want to put that out there in terms of where the ICRC stands on that. And we also see the need for limits, although we're still trying to understand what they might look like when it comes to artificial intelligence. Thank you for that.
Thanks. Let's now move closely to our case study, which is the military application of AI systems. And I would like to first get your thoughts, Mary-Ellen. What challenges have autonomous weapon systems created for our legal systems? I mean, there are two camps in this debate, aren't there? Those who believe that our legal frameworks are already sufficient, and perhaps we only need to reinterpret the existing frameworks. And there are those who believe that we need to readjust the frameworks to regulate the military use of AI. And I think Jonathan also earlier mentioned to which camp he belongs. But do you think if there is anything new to autonomous systems from your experience, and if there's anything which is not already covered by laws and conventions?
Thanks very much, Sajjad, and thanks for having me. So I'm a practitioner, a diplomat, and I'm like, unlike others, I'm not an international lawyer, but we deal with these issues in the field. If you talk about arms control, the first instrument that we have is international law, international humanitarian law. We have treaties and we have norms. And especially with AI, the applicability of international law is tremendously complicated. And we don't really know yet how to do that. And I think I don't want to repeat what's been said, and I agree with what's been set out. What makes the complexity of AI makes it very difficult, the speed with which it can be implemented. And we're speaking about things that don't even exist yet, and for which we do not really have, not exist yet, I mean, fully exist, as in fully autonomous systems, and for which we do not really have definitions yet. We don't have good legal definitions, or technical definitions, political definitions. So that makes it really hard to apply international law. We're speaking about function here also, not a weapon, as we are used to in other fora. A very big instrument to apply international humanitarian law is the Article 36 reviews that ministries of defense have to do on their weapons. But to do that on AI systems is very complicated because the highly technical nature. But I think the one thing that hasn't been mentioned as an AI application yet is the use of swarms of drones that are in self-learning systems. So even if you do an Article 36 review and this system turns out is okay, they go out and learn something, or one item in the swarm learns something, teaches it to the others. They come back from a mission. Do you have to do your Article 6 review all over again? Do you know what they've learned? So that makes it really hard to have a linear application of what we already do. And the other thing is the speed of the decision making. Not only makes it that creates really big problems for a commander in the field, but it makes it impossible for that commander in the field to go back to his lawyer and ask, hey, is this what I'm going to do now, this targeting, this mission, is that in agreement with international law? So that's an added complication. So that for sure is an issue. So how to apply. Now, apart from the difficulty of how to apply, the problem then is, is it sufficient? Do you need more laws or norms than what we have, and that will need to be applied in a better way? And there, internationally, views differ. And you see that militarily powerful countries generally oppose new laws, and that a couple of other countries promote new laws. There's a big debate about whether you need hard law or soft law. And well, from where I sit, I definitely the scope for development of soft law in terms of sharing experiences, providing guidance, setting up guidelines, and that sort of thing. Whether it's diplomatically possible to move to a new convention or other type of agreements, that's another thing. But these are issues we discuss in the context of the GGE on laws, for example, in the context of the Convention on Certain Conventional Weapons in Geneva. And those discussions have been going on for quite a while, which shows how complex this all is.
Yeah, we will come back to the complexity of the discussions later on, and I will definitely get your thoughts on that as well. But for now, I would like to go back to Jonathan. One of the common suggestions, which is also already mentioned in our discussions in relation to regulation of autonomous weapon systems, is a form of human control, that there should be always a form of human control. This idea could be mentioned, for example, in relation to human being on the loop or in the loop. It's been circulating around for quite a while. Some people may even say there is no straight loop. It's more like a process. But do you think that human supervision would solve the moral and legal problem that we can face by autonomous weapon systems, or that is just one part of the story and there's something that may be a bit more problematic that we should think about?
Yeah, thanks for that question. If I could, maybe I can start off with talking about some of those limits I referenced to autonomous weapon systems, and then move into what it means for AI to be part of an autonomous capability. So, as a point of departure, it's worth noting that states have fielded some weapons with autonomous capabilities with relatively little legal fanfare. Many are defensive and all are anti-material, not anti-personnel. So we know that not all weapons with autonomous capabilities would always raise legal concerns. But the prospect of autonomous weapon systems that will be developed to select and engage a target without any human intervention is trending towards their sort of less constrained and wider use, and that does increase concerns. And so they're being developed for a far wider range of threats to be used in situations where civilians are present without human supervision, in large coordinated numbers, such as swarms that we were just talking about. And so autonomous weapon systems are being developed in ways that are raising concerns that they exceed the limits that are currently in place on weapons with other autonomous capabilities. And this is producing various challenges that I've already spoken about. And so what the ICRC is trying to do is we're learning from weapon systems with autonomous capabilities that are already regarded as legally acceptable and trying to understand what additional limits need to be put on autonomous weapon systems to ensure that they retain a level of human control and judgment as required. And so first, we see that there are controls that are needed on a weapons systems parameters of use, such as restricting types of targets or placing temporal or spatial limits on its operations. We also see a second sort of bucket of limits being around controls on the environment. So, for example, this might include using autonomous weapon systems only in environments where civilians and civilian objects are not present. And then third are controls through human-machine interaction to allow the user to supervise the system and to intervene in its operation where necessary. Now, if we move over to AI, although, as I just mentioned, the ICRC is a strong proponent of course, preserving human control over tasks and human judgment in autonomous weapon systems, when it comes to AI capabilities, including those used in autonomous weapon systems, we don't think that human control and judgment alone solves the legal and moral challenges that they pose. And what this means is that even when there's adequate human control and judgment incorporated into autonomous weapon systems, we see additional needs to guard against potential risks that arise from the human-machine interaction specific to AI. So we need to consider a user's situational awareness, such as the knowledge of the state of the system, its state of learning at the time of human intervention. We need to consider the lack of time availability for effective human intervention. We need to consider automation bias that risks humans over trusting the system. And we need to consider how artificial intelligence could create a moral buffer that risks humans sort of transferring their responsibilities to the machine as opposed to retaining it with the human as human agency. And so, these are the types of challenges that remain beyond the presence of human control and judgment. And, to sum up, the ICRC is assessing these challenges, and we continue to develop our thinking through dialogue with states, technologists, and others on how to best address those challenges.
Yeah, thank you. So, Mary Ellen, this issue of human control is very interesting because some people would argue that a lot of evidence which comes to humans is already mediated or shaped by technologies. So in some ways, they would ask, how meaningful is this idea of human control if everything that we get, a lot of information that comes to some commander that is sitting there, most of it is actually already brought about by technologies. Is it purely psychological, or do you think if it's legally or morally also important here?
I think you answered the question with your question, the way you put it, Sajjad. Do I think that there is meaningful human control? It's impossible. Karen has already spoken to this. Jonathan has as well. This idea that a human being will have the last say. These weapons are built in order that a human being will not slow down the process, that the killing will go forward without the human capacity to make the judgment whether the kill decision goes forward or not. It really is a moment. This is an extremely important, critical moment for the creativity we international lawyers can bring to bear. Our current legal concepts are not sufficient for this new development in weapons, for the very reason that that human capacity is not up to the task if we're going to program these weapons to do what the designers are telling us that they might do. And as Karen said, we're not even certain we can predict, we'll even know ahead of time what the learning AI capacity, the learning task will be able to accomplish. That is why the idea of meaningful human control, if it's actually implemented the way it has been conceived, it would amount to a ban on AI weapons. You would not be able to use these in the way that they are being planned by the top militaries that are doing the research, because the ability to have a human being make the decision means that they will go back to the technology we have now with unmanned systems, where there is a human being overseeing the actual kill decision. Although I would add, part of what has made me so concerned about this new development is that watching what's happened with unmanned systems, we already have operators who are relying completely on the algorithm for determining targets and are not really exercising currently the human judgment, putting the human conscience onto individual decisions. And these are usually they're not with swarms. These are one-off Reaper drone targeted attacks, like the 50 plus attacks that the US carried out in Somalia during 2020. Most of those were simply the result of the computer algorithm. So we're already lacking meaningful human control, and when you increase the speed and the automaticity, it will be that much greater a problem, which is why I'm suggesting what might sound radical, but it's actually a return to an idea that was gaining ground in the 1990s and coalesces with the rising knowledge that international human rights law is part of every situation, even those that are armed conflict. It was Alan Rosas and Theodore Morone who said, we need to move to a unified principle of the use of force, so that any deployment of lethal force, to be lawful, has to be under the principle of necessity, that it will save a life, and that we move away from intentional killing for the purpose of military advantage. That's the only kind of rule that will actually limit and create a ban on these weapons. And it's the only thing that really makes sense with regard to these rules, because it's only through international human rights law that we can do the most important thing, which folks who introduce the idea of meaningful human control and have been proponents like Human Rights Watch, what they want is that the dignity of human life will not be so cheapened by having a machine make the kill decision. Then you are killed by a machine is considered, and this is put so eloquently by the Vatican in their position at the Conference on Certain Conventional Weapons, that no human being's dignity is upheld when they are eliminated, when they are executed by a machine. We need to go back to human rights law, and any automaticity has to be in that defense of human life, so that the right to life is not arbitrarily denied.
Very interesting thoughts, Marie-Hélène. So you mentioned, I actually have a short follow-up question for you, because you mentioned that some of the current operators of, for example, remote drones still rely a lot on algorithms to make their decisions. So I assume your objection also goes towards using algorithm even by human operators. Do you think if there's something also legally problematic also with that in that context, or?
Yes, no, as I said, my main area of connection to artificial intelligence has been following very closely the use of unmanned systems, especially drones, in killing operations. And these are now being deployed in ways, killing is happening in ways that would have clearly been considered unlawful in 1989, before the end of the Cold War. There is no doubt that killing 10 people in a country with which you are at peace, I'm just using a quick example, the Qasem Soleimani execution on January 3rd of 2020, that would have been considered plainly a mass murder. The US was not involved in armed conflict and so forth. It was so easy to do. I'm sure that the location, the tracking of the vehicles in which Soleimani and the other 9 persons were riding, that this was all just keyed into the Reaper drone, great deal of automatic attack. We have just, we move relentlessly to allow the technology to have its full play. We are failing completely to control the violence and the killing that is being advanced by the ease of this technology with the rapid development of the technology. So to go back to an old idea where human life is valued because we don't permit intentional killing, it's always in defensive mode, is in my view the only normative and conceptual way to go forward with this new technology. We're not going to put the genie back in the bottle, as one of my fellow panelists has already said. So we need to reconceive the normative ground in which this technology is operating. And it's got to be human life first, the right to life first. And we need to restrict this privilege to intentionally kill with every kind of new weapons development that comes along.
Thank you, Mary-Ellen. Karen, do you have any thoughts on this, or?
Thank you. Well, I have to say I find this absolutely fascinating because I'm not an international lawyer, and weapons is definitely not my thing. And I'm really quite persuaded by what I hear from Mary-Ellen, and I think this notion of the cheapening of human life because of the ease with which one can take it and wash one's hands is really important. This distancing from the place at which the damage is done and the reality of that, I think, is really important in shaping how we think about these weapons. And I also agree with what Mary-Ellen said about the notion of meaningful human control, understood as simply putting a human in the loop, as it were, with their finger on the button. That's not meaningful human control. Because to have meaningful control, you have to have a full understanding of what's going on, and you can't possibly have that. And in fact, one of the great benefits of artificial intelligence is their cognitive capacity exceeds human capacity. That's why we use them. So to think that a mere mortal could somehow have superior knowledge and understanding of that moment in order to intervene responsibly is absolutely ludicrous. I do think it's ludicrous. So if we're only relying on that as a safeguard, we are in serious trouble. And buzz not me. I don't want to be that person who's given the buzzer. I'm passing that one on. So I, even though I'm not an expert in this, I am very persuaded by the arguments that Mary-Ellen's made, but I don't want to commit at this stage, but I'm certainly attracted to the things that she's put forward, even though I can see that from an international law perspective, they may sound quite radical. Thanks.
Thanks, Karen. I want to change the topic slightly and go back to Mary-Ellen, because you have, as a diplomat, you also mentioned the complexity of some of the negotiations which are going on about regulation of the weapon systems. So one of the issues about the technologies which are used in defense and security purposes is that there is a wide range of social groups who believe their perspectives should inform the regulation of these systems, and especially autonomous weapon systems. They're a very hot topic. And then you have, even in academia, you have many different disciplines, from engineers and IT specialists to social scientists of different sort. And then you have politicians, lawyers, and you have also even media, and even the public. They also have some opinions about these issues, and they think their voices should be heard. So we see a variety of perspectives, and there is a lot of times they're very complex and even incompatible with each other. What are the issues that, what are the challenges that have you seen because of this complexity of the issues? Is there anything which could be done, or should we just accept that whatever conclusion we come up with, a lot of people are going to be disagreeing with us?
Thank you, Sajjad, for that question. All these people involved, and still we haven't solved it. That shows how very complex the issue is, and exactly proves why we need a very multidisciplinary approach to this, just because it is so complex. it's a matter of having an inclusive debate to also include different points of views, as in from social groups or from an ethical perspective, which may be different, or a political perspective. So I very much welcome this broad range of or this participatory approach. And you can see that in the group of governmental experts in Geneva that's been working on this for a long time, that all those views are at the table. There's lots of NGOs participating, there's academia, there's the military that's represented. And I want to commend especially the ICRC, which is contributing a lot to this debate and putting in a lot of thinking and reaching out to communities. So I think it's a very necessary development. But what I'd like to highlight, maybe because that hasn't been mentioned so much yet, is the roles of ministries of defense, who, of course, as their primary objective is to ensure the security of their country, and they see the rapid development of AI in other areas. And many of them are convinced that they need AI in not only in their weapon systems, but in all of their operations, also logistics and everything, in order to keep their military position or to keep their military superiority. And this is a perspective that we have to take into account. And what tanks were around the Second World War and nuclear weapons were in the Cold War, in my view, that's what AI is very soon. AI will very soon replace the need to have that type of weapon in order to be able to either compete militarily or to be able to deter military attack. So it's important to address these ideas that the military has, also because they are the ones that are taking this topic forward. Another sector that hasn't been mentioned so much is the private sector. And they, of course, have a very important role, because that's where these weapons are, or the technology for these weapons is being developed, which is a game changer from weapons development in the past. It used to be the other way around. Military complexes would develop weapon systems and there would be spin-off to the private sector. So if you want to do anything with the design weapons, you need to talk to the private sector. And at the same time, the private sector is really desperate for guidance, because they are investing big time and they want to know whether what they're building is going to be legal in the end. So the more you need all those points of view around the table, and then I haven't even mentioned national parliaments and political groupings, which are essential to democracies. It means that the process may take longer. The GGE has been going on for 6 years now. It takes a long time to listen to everybody, but I'm convinced it's necessary. It's the only way.
Thank you. Jonathan, do you have any comments on this?
Yeah, I was just quipping with a colleague the other day that the only thing worse than decision-making by machine is decision-making by committee. But I have to absolutely agree with you, Marilyn. I mean, in the case of developing limits on autonomous weapons, there are a huge number of stakeholders involved who have very different and very important perspectives. So is this a challenge to fix, or is it a challenge to embrace? And I think because it is such a crowded field with crowded interests, and not all of those views are the same, even within the same interest groups. Governments are obviously debating these things. So this is also nothing new to the development or the elaboration of norms or rules of international law, but it makes it a rich environment. I would say that that's why, and thank you for your kind words about the ICRC. I mean, that's why the ICRC does convene expert meetings on things like autonomous weapon systems and cyber operation. It's why we are proudly present in giving our perspectives to the UN's group of government experts on lethal autonomous weapon systems. And I would say it is encouraging that many national submissions and joint submissions by groups of states have started to stress similar positions, which does actually testify, even though it's taken years, to a growing convergence on views. And just to sort of tease those out, you know, the ICRC's analysis, we're seeing agreements on, for example, the need to maintain human control, involvement or judgment, and the rationale behind needing those things. Upholding legal obligations and ethical principles, and ensuring human responsibility and accountability. Those are pretty important things for states to come to agreement on. And then there was also convergence on views on the types of measures that can contribute to ensuring human control and then the involvement of judgment, which can include limits on tasks and, you know, target sets or profiles, the temporal or spatial limitations that I was talking about before. So I would say, despite, or actually maybe perhaps because of the diverse range of views in this big discussion, we do see movement towards consensus on certain issues. And I think that's a real important accomplishment and a testament to states coming together on these issues. Thank you.
Thanks, Jonathan. Let's briefly move to other applications of AI. And my final question is for you, Karen. Apart from the military applications, what are the other sensitive applications of AI which can create social issues and be legally challenging? And what are the things that you think we should consider in regulation of AI in general?
Thanks, Sajjad. So that's another question to which my answer is, how long have you got? So again, I want to draw attention to some of the application capabilities of these technologies that we've already referred to, and to think about just how they could be directed in ways that we wouldn't wish to embrace. So these are technologies that can sift, sort, and exclude individuals from opportunities and from benefits in ways that may be safety critical, human rights critical, and have scale effects on our social, political, moral, and cultural environments. So that in itself is powerful. At the same time, they can control and manipulate in covert and highly targeted ways. They have increasing capacities to imitate human traits so that it's very difficult to distinguish what is a machine that you're interacting with and whether it's actually a human. And the capacity for this to undermine and devalue the importance of real human connection and care and contact, I think, is also something we need to take seriously. And of course, that's one of the reasons why it's such an exciting field, is all the amazing things that we could do. But at the same time, there are also amazing things that we really shouldn't be doing. So I'm just going to leave it there and leave the question hanging, because I don't think I could possibly round up all the possibilities that would cause me to be worried and want to speak out and say, stop, we need to stop this. This is going to kill us. So I'll just leave it to my other panelists to chip in. Thank you.
Thanks, Karen. Unfortunately, we are short of time, and this is all what we have time for. I would like to thank our esteemed panelists on behalf of all our viewers. And I would like to say, take care, everyone, and goodbye from me.
That thought-provoking discussion, which considered the fit of current rules of international law with a quickly emerging technology like AI weaponry, was a perfect way to bring the 2021 annual meeting exercise of reconception of international law to a close. Thank you all so much for participating. So to close, you should have received an invitation with instructions for preparing the signature drink created expressly for this occasion by two of our members, Beth George and Tess Bridgman. I hope you've had an opportunity to prepare it at home, and I invite you to charge your glasses as I tell you a bit about its origins. Last year, Beth and Tess's cocktail creation was named the Charming Betsy, after a merchant ship of that name that was the subject of one of the earliest US Supreme Court cases related to international law. Continuing our nautical theme, this year's signature cocktail is called the Paquetabana, after a landmark 1900 decision by the US Supreme Court that famously held that international law is part of US law, and that the capture of a coastal fishing vessels as prizes of war violated customary international law. The Paquetabana was one of those two fishing vessels at issue in the case. The other was known as the Lola, which is the name we've given to the alcohol-free version of our signature ASIL cocktail. As many of you will remember, at our first virtual annual meeting last year, the members of our technology committee, Beck Hamilton, Karina Gugler, and Anupam Chander, came up with the idea of asking annual meeting attendees to share a photo of themselves living their lives in the time of pandemic. We then took the opportunity to combine those images into a photo montage of the faces of our community. The idea was so popular that we decided to do it again this year, and I think it might even be an ASIL tradition going forward. So get your glasses ready, and please join me in watching the faces of ASIL as they populate your screen. These visuals represent the ASIL community in all its strength, resilience, and diversity. And so, against this group portrait of our worldwide membership, I invite you to raise your glass and join me in a toast to our community, our volunteer leaders, our amazing staff at Tiller House, to Mark Agrast and Wes Rist, to all of you. Cheers. I wish I could see you. From the bottom of my heart, I want to thank you for being part and for making this gathering so special. All we can do now is look forward. So please mark your calendars for the 2022 meeting, which will take place on April 6th through 9th. On behalf of the Executive Council and our 2022 annual meeting co-chairs, Rachel Lopez, Kish Corella, and Patrick Pearsall, I look forward to seeing you in person. Yes, I said it, in person in Washington, DC. I now declare the 115th annual meeting of the American Society of International Law adjourned. Be safe and be well.